At 3:47 p.m. on a Friday, my boss smiled and told me the promotion I'd waited 12 years for was being postponed indefinitely. No warning, no apology, just erased, like my years of building the system that made his success possible. I didn't argue. I walked out knowing I'd make that sentence the most expensive mistake of his career. If you've ever been promised something they never delivered, stay with me. And tell me in the comments what your breaking point was. And if you believe loyalty deserves better, hit subscribe. The meeting was supposed to be a formality, a signature, a handshake, a promotion 12 years in the making. Instead, Ethan Carver leaned back in his leather chair, smiled like he was delivering good news, and told me the executive board had decided to delay the VP transition indefinitely. His tone was casual, practiced, the same tone he used when discussing lunch options or weather forecasts. I sat there, nodding slowly, pretending to process his words, like they made sense. Delay, indefinitely. After 12 years of building Atlas Freight's operational systems, after restructuring 3 regional networks that saved the company nearly $28 million in efficiency costs, after mentoring half the people in that building, my promotion was being turned into a placeholder. He didn't even look uncomfortable. "You know how the market's been lately," he said. "Corporates freezing new executive roles until next quarter." That was the moment I understood he wasn't talking about market conditions. He was talking about me. I'd stopped being an investment. I was a resource, something they could keep extracting from as long as I stayed quiet. I asked one question, the only one that mattered. "Does this mean the position isn't being created?" Ethan exhaled like he'd rehearsed his answer. "Not right now. You'll still have the same scope and responsibility, but without the title or salary adjustment. I know it's not ideal, Christine, but you're a team player. You've always been steady." Steady. That was his word for predictable. I felt my pulse slow, not rise. No anger, just clarity. I thought about every weekend email, every all-nighter, every time I defended this company in meetings where I should have defended myself. "You'll be first in line when things open up again," he added, as if that promise meant anything now. I closed my notebook and looked at him, really looked at him. The press suit, the corporate watch, the rehearsed empathy. He didn't even know what the system he was trying to protect looked like under the surface. I did. I'd built it. Every shipment, every carrier algorithm, every contract update, my fingerprints were in it. I stood, smoothed the edge of my jacket, and said, "Understood." That's all. No speech, no scene. Just understanding. He smiled, relieved. "I knew you'd take this professionally." He had no idea what professionalism really looked like. It wasn't patience, it was precision. I walked out of his office and back through the open plan floor I designed, watching the glow of monitors displaying the performance metrics I'd written. 99.2% on-time shipments this quarter. 47 active vendor contracts, all still running on systems I created. I paused by the glass window overlooking the freight yard below. Trucks moved in perfect synchronization, the result of a routing protocol I'd fought to implement 3 years ago. The same one he'd once called too ambitious. It struck me that Atlas would keep running smoothly long after I left, for a while anyway, because that's what well-built systems do. They hide the absence of their architects. I took a breath, logged out of my workstation, and left my badge on the desk. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't go back. I went in a different direction. Before Ethan Carver ever sat in that office pretending to make hard decisions, I was the one building the foundation he stood on. 12 years earlier, Atlas Freight had been a disorganized regional player, struggling to meet even modest client benchmarks. I joined as a systems analyst, one of 5 people in a department no one cared about, working out of a converted warehouse office with flickering lights and outdated servers. I remember my first week, someone joked that the only thing Atlas delivered on time was excuses. I stayed because I saw potential buried in the chaos. They didn't need more talk about leadership. They needed infrastructure, data, and accountability. Over time, I built the core logistics intelligence system that synchronized carrier tracking, predictive maintenance, and regional client forecasting. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked, and it saved the company millions. I wasn't chasing a title back then. I was chasing precision, order in an industry built on unpredictability. For years, Ethan praised me as the backbone of the operation. He called me the quiet force that keeps Atlas alive. Quiet was right. I never made noise about the promotions that passed me by, or the way my ideas got filtered through him before reaching the boardroom. I told myself good work would speak loud enough on its own. It didn't. The system I built gave Atlas the power to grow, but it also gave them the illusion that people like me were replaceable. They saw numbers, not the person behind them. That realization didn't come overnight. It came slowly, through small betrayals disguised as corporate logic. I started noticing budget reports that removed my name from project summaries, internal memos that credited Ethan's team for departmental restructuring successes I had authored line by line. Still, I stayed, thinking loyalty would earn respect. It never did. What finally broke that illusion wasn't anger. It was a quiet conversation with a vendor I'd worked with for years, a mid-size logistics startup called NovaTrans. Their CEO, Lydia Rowan, once told me, "Your models are 3 years ahead of what the market's ready for." At the time, I laughed it off. Now I realized she'd meant it. NovaTrans didn't have the scale or the polish of Atlas, but they had what Atlas never would: curiosity. They asked how systems worked instead of who got credit for them. When Atlas shelved my proposal for an AI-based freight route optimizer, citing budget priorities, Lydia reached out again. "If they don't see the future in it," she said, "build it somewhere that does." Her timing was almost eerie. The week Ethan delayed my promotion was the same week NovaTrans announced plans to expand into the Midwest. I started paying attention. I studied their logistics model late at night, analyzing what they lacked and how my old system could be rebuilt smarter. I didn't think of it as revenge then. It was curiosity, pure and simple. What would happen if I took the same blueprint Atlas undervalued and gave it to a company that actually listened? What if precision didn't have to hide behind corporate politics? The more I thought about it, the more I saw the irony. Everything Ethan feared, competition, innovation, losing control, was built into the very system he'd ignored. I didn't leave Atlas in a burst of defiance. I left quietly with a copy of my own brain, not files, not code, just knowledge. The roots, the relationships, the logic of how it all connected. They'd taken my promotion, but they couldn't take the architecture of my mind. By the time I answered Lydia's call, I already knew what she was going to ask. "Christine," she said, "if we gave you full control, budget, authority, vision, could you rebuild the system Atlas buried?" I didn't need to think. I just said, "Yes, and this time I'll make sure no one can take it away." The weekend after that conversation with Lydia, I didn't celebrate or announce anything. I simply opened my laptop at home, poured black coffee, and began to draw lines between everything I'd built for Atlas and everything NovaTrans lacked. I wasn't stealing, I was remembering. The structure was still in my head. Which vendors responded fastest under pressure, which regional hubs were underutilized, which carriers needed better forecasting models. I wasn't angry, I was focused. I spent Saturday mapping out what a full integration could look like if someone actually allowed it to evolve instead of die in a boardroom memo. By Sunday night, my plan looked less like a draft and more like an operating manual for an entirely new regional system. I saved it, closed the laptop, and stared at the quiet glow of the city outside my apartment window. That was the moment I realized the real transfer of power had already happened. Ethan still thought he owned the system, but I was the only one who could build it again. Knowledge isn't loyalty, it's leverage. Monday morning, I updated my LinkedIn profile from Senior Systems Director at Atlas Freight to open to collaboration and strategic growth. It was neutral enough to avoid suspicion, but clear enough to signal intent. Within 2 hours, messages started coming in. Old colleagues, recruiters, vendors. I didn't reply to most of them. I only responded to one, Lydia. We met again that Thursday in a small co-working space near the river. No contracts, no promises, just questions. She asked what I needed to make the vision real. I told her autonomy, a clean data slate, and a team that trusted the math more than the hierarchy. She smiled and said, "You'll have it." By Friday afternoon, I'd submitted my formal resignation. Ethan didn't even read the letter himself. HR did. He was in meetings, which was corporate language for too comfortable to care. That suited me fine. I didn't owe him drama. I owed myself distance. Leaving Atlas wasn't about walking away from a job. It was about reclaiming ownership of the intellect they'd borrowed. By the time anyone realized what I was doing, I would already be rebuilding the same system, smarter, faster, and untouchable. Joining NovaTrans wasn't a leap. It was a recalibration. The first thing I noticed was silence, not the tense corporate kind filled with invisible competition, but the productive hum of people actually working on ideas instead of guarding them. The office was smaller, open, unpolished. You could see the wiring along the ceiling and the whiteboards covered in marker streaks, formulas and notes scribbled over lunch. Lydia didn't believe in bureaucracy. If an idea can't survive in daylight, it's not worth protecting, she told me on my first day. She handed me a keycard labeled simply Operations. No title, no ceremony. Build what you wish someone had let you build, she said. I did. I started by taking apart the thing Atlas had ignored, the predictive routing engine. At Atlas, they'd called it too expensive. At NovaTrans, it became the spine of our growth. I gathered a small team, 5 people who reminded me of myself 10 years ago. They weren't perfect. They were hungry. Renee Kim, our data integration specialist, could turn any incomplete data set into usable patterns. Tara Holmes, systems optimization, questioned everything, which is exactly what I needed. And Daniel Cruz, logistics coordination, had the kind of instinct that you can't teach. He could look at a route map and spot a failure before it happened. Together, we built version 2.0 of a system the old company didn't think was worth finishing. But I didn't replicate Atlas's architecture. I redesigned it. I learned from their blind spots. The dependencies that required manual input, the vendor communication lags, the outdated forecasting algorithm that prioritized short-term contracts over long-term reliability. I erased all of it. We built a fully automated operations model that could self-correct under real-time pressure. No budget constraints. No waiting for approval. Lydia trusted results, not hierarchies. Every week, we saw measurable improvements, reduced delivery variance by 12%, shortened routing time by 18%, and cut vendor escalation by almost half. We worked like people with something to prove, but it wasn't about revenge, it was about respect. The real satisfaction wasn't in outperforming Atlas, it was in finally working somewhere that valued the invisible logic behind success. 2 months in, NovaTrans started drawing attention. Freight industry blogs mentioned a mysterious new optimization system outperforming regional giants. Lydia smiled when she showed me the first article. "They'll figure out soon enough who's behind it," she said. I didn't care if they did. I wasn't hiding, just focused. What surprised me most was how many people from Atlas reached out quietly. Mid-level managers, data analysts, even one senior coordinator, all asking some version of the same question. Is it true? Are you really with NovaTrans? I never confirmed, but my silence said enough. Within 6 months, NovaTrans had moved from a mid-tier competitor to a regional disruptor. We started bidding against Atlas for contracts I used to manage. I knew their strengths, but more importantly, I knew their cracks. The outdated risk models, the over-reliance on manual reporting, the assumptions baked into their pricing structures. The irony was that everything I'd warned them about was now eating them from the inside. Ethan had replaced insight with confidence, and confidence doesn't move freight efficiently. The first time NovaTrans beat Atlas in a client bid, Lydia called me into her office. "You realize what you just did, right?" she asked. "You outperformed your old employer using the same blueprint they ignored." I thought about that for a long moment before answering. "No," I said. "I built the version they were too afraid of." From that day forward, I stopped thinking of Atlas as competition. They were just a cautionary tale. The system we built wasn't about taking them down. It was about proving what happens when competence meets freedom. Still, I knew that eventually paths would cross. And when they did, the difference between their arrogance and our precision would become impossible to ignore. It started with an email that looked harmless. "Request for proposal. Midwestern Freight Modernization Contract." I opened it and froze. The issuing client was Northline Manufacturing, one of Atlas Freight's cornerstone accounts for nearly a decade. I had personally designed their original logistics flow years ago. I knew every inefficiency, every choke point, every outdated process buried under layers of spreadsheets and bureaucracy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Atlas had built their name on that contract, and now NovaTrans had a chance to take it from under them. Lydia called me into her office the same morning. "This is their crown jewel," she said, tapping the printed proposal. "They won't expect us to bid this aggressively." She paused, studying my face. "Are you comfortable going after it?" Comfortable wasn't the right word. I felt a calm precision, the kind that comes only when you already know the outcome before the game starts. "I built their system," I said. "I know where it breaks under pressure." For the next 3 weeks, my team and I worked like surgeons. We didn't just prepare a proposal, we built a case study in operational evolution. I reconstructed Northline's existing process map from memory, overlaying it with every pain point I'd ever documented at Atlas, but they'd ignored. We modeled what NovaTrans could deliver in half the cost and 1/3 the time. Tara optimized the predictive engine, Renee refined the data visualization interface, and Daniel ran simulations until our model hit 99.4% reliability under peak load. It wasn't revenge, it was mathematics with consequences. Meanwhile, Ethan was doing what he always did, selling certainty without substance. I knew how Atlas pitched. They'd lead with reputation, sprinkle in corporate buzzwords, and rely on the same stale metrics I had built years ago. They'd assume Northline's loyalty was stronger than logic. It wasn't. When the day of the final pitch arrived, the conference center was neutral ground, a sterile glass building with long tables, white light, and the faint hum of competitive tension. Lydia spoke first, opening with data, not flattery. "We don't claim perfection," she said. "We claim improvement measurable in every delivery." Then she handed me the clicker. I walked the room through our predictive analytics engine, the real-time routing adjustments, and the dynamic vendor negotiation model that adapted pricing in transit. The executives leaned forward. I recognized 2 of them. They'd sat across from me years ago at Atlas, when my ideas were called conceptual. Now they were watching the concept outperform reality. When the lights came up, there were no polite smiles, just silence, the kind that follows something undeniable. Ethan's team presented 2 hours later. I didn't stay. I didn't need to. 2 days passed before the official notice arrived. NovaTrans awarded full operational contract for the Midwest division. The value, $210 million over 5 years. The contract Atlas had used to fund their regional growth was now ours. Lydia printed the acceptance email and handed it to me without a word. I folded it once and slipped it into my notebook. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in months. Ethan. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Christine," he said, too calm. "I just heard about the Northline contract." "Congratulations." I replied evenly. "It's a major deal." His pause was heavy. "You're behind this, aren't you? NovaTrans didn't have that level of system integration before you joined." I didn't confirm or deny. "You sound surprised," I said. "Surprise isn't the right word," he muttered. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I built what you were afraid to fund." He started to speak again, but I ended the call before he could find the right tone between anger and regret. That evening, I sat in the NovaTrans office long after everyone else left. Outside, the city lights shimmered on the river like the pulse of something alive and evolving. For years, Atlas had told me timing wasn't right. Budgets were tight. Patience was a virtue. Now, the only thing tight was their client pipeline collapsing inward. I wasn't celebrating. I was processing the full symmetry of it. They had postponed my promotion indefinitely, and I had postponed their dominance permanently. Revenge didn't require destruction. It only required demonstration. The contract wasn't a win against them. It was proof that the system always rewards the builder who understands how it works. The first voicemail came the next morning. Ethan's voice cracked at the edges of composure. "Christine, we should talk. The board wants to discuss possibilities for reconciliation." Reconciliation. That word hung in the air like a poorly timed joke. The man who told me to be patient now wanted urgency. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. Within hours, 2 more arrived. One from HR asking if I'd consider rejoining under revised terms, and another from an executive I barely knew, trying to sound apologetic while circling the real issue. They were hemorrhaging clients and needed a savior. They didn't need me when I was there. They needed what I built. And now that it was gone, they couldn't replicate it. That was never revenge. It was math, cause and effect. I didn't respond. I didn't even draft a message. Instead, I switched my LinkedIn profile to private, the digital equivalent of closing a door quietly but permanently. Inside NovaTrans, life moved forward. Lydia called a brief meeting that afternoon. "Atlas reached out to me," she said, looking at me with half a grin. "They offered a consulting arrangement to share insights for mutual stability." I declined. I nodded. There was nothing left to share. The stability they wanted was the one they'd dismantled. Still, part of me reflected on how quickly confidence turns to panic when the foundation erodes. At Atlas, they'd built their hierarchy on control. Titles, bonuses, executive language. At NovaTrans, we built ours on contribution. Every person mattered because the system needed everyone to function, not just someone to take credit. That was the real difference. Atlas ran on authority. NovaTrans ran on trust. As news spread of the North Line win, my inbox filled with messages from old colleagues, people still inside Atlas thanking me for proving that quiet work mattered. "You made them see," one said. "Maybe, but seeing doesn't fix broken vision." By week's end, Ethan called one last time. I didn't answer. He left no voicemail, but I didn't need to hear it to know what he wanted. Assurance that I hadn't burned the bridge completely. I hadn't. I just built one in the opposite direction. That Friday night, as the city lights flickered through the office glass, I stood by the window and watched trucks rolling through NovaTrans's newly expanded hub. I felt no triumph, only clarity. They'd taught me patience. I'd taught them consequence. Silence, it turned out, was the loudest response I could give. In the months that followed, Atlas became a name that surfaced only in headlines about regional performance decline. I didn't read them for satisfaction. I read them to remind myself how fast certainty can decay when built on neglect. At NovaTrans, our operations expanded faster than anyone predicted. We hired 30 new staff, secured contracts across 3 states, and were invited to speak at industry panels about adaptive logistics modeling. Every question they asked me on stage traced back to one principle I'd learned the hard way. Systems fail when leadership mistakes loyalty for ownership. I never set out to destroy Atlas. They did that themselves by ignoring the expertise that kept them alive. All I did was move my work somewhere it could breathe. That was the real victory, seeing what was once confined by fear flourish under freedom. I kept the offer letters from Renee, Tara, and Daniel pinned inside my notebook, not as trophies, but as proof that talent follows trust. They'd risked comfort to chase purpose. And together we built something that worked, because everyone was seen, not managed. When people asked how I stayed so composed after losing a promotion, I told them the truth. I didn't lose anything. I gained distance. Distance sharpens perspective. It shows you that some promises were only meant to keep you still. Ethan once told me success required patience. He was right, but patience for the right thing, not the wrong people. Atlas could rebuild 1,000 systems and never replicate what they lost, because the difference wasn't technical, it was human. As for me, I stopped calling it revenge. It was growth. Growth they refused to allow. I hadn't burned the bridge. I'd outgrown it so completely, it disappeared behind me. And as I watched NovaTrans reach the milestones they once told me were impossible, I realized something simple. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped shrinking to fit inside their limits. If you've ever sat in a meeting where someone told you to be patient while they cashed in on your work, you already know how this story feels. People ask me if I'd do it differently, if I'd fight harder, argue louder, make them see my worth sooner. The truth is, none of that matters when you're explaining your value to people who already decided to ignore it. The only thing that changed everything was walking away. That's the part no one prepares you for, the silence after you stop chasing approval. It's heavier at first, then freeing. I share this story not to glorify leaving, but to remind anyone watching, your expertise is currency. Don't let someone else set its exchange rate. I built what they dismissed, and they built the excuse that destroyed them. If you've ever been told your time isn't right yet, ask yourself, right for who? If this hit a little too close, tell me in the comments what loyalty cost you. I read them all. And if you believe in taking your power back, not through shouting, but through thriving, subscribe. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's building something they can never copy. Looking back, I realize revenge was never the goal. It was recognition. The kind you stop waiting for and start earning on your own terms. What happened with Atlas taught me that loyalty, when misplaced, becomes a slow kind of self-betrayal. You keep showing up, hoping consistency will change someone's mind, but all it does is teach them how much they can take for granted. I learned that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. When people underestimate you, they give you room to observe, to plan, and to choose when to move. I didn't need to destroy anyone. I just needed to prove to myself that my worth was never defined by a title or a promise withheld by someone else's fear. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. I didn't yell, threaten, or fight. I just built something better, and that was enough to make the people who dismissed me face the reality of their choices. That's the kind of revenge that doesn't need to be repeated. It teaches itself. How to get started today. Write down one promise you've been waiting on and decide if it's time to stop waiting. Identify one skill that no one values yet and start developing it quietly for yourself. Protect your time like it's equity. Every hour you give away to the wrong cause delays the one that's meant for you. Don't argue your worth. Demonstrate it somewhere new. If this story made you rethink loyalty, comment below and tell me what lesson hit hardest. Share it with someone who's still waiting for their recognition to come from the wrong place. And subscribe for more stories about taking back control without losing your humanity.